Okay, everyone. I'm going to start today's lesson with a movie quote. And I'm going to start the movie quote off, and I want somebody in here to finish it. And this is a very popular movie, and it has been for over 60 years. So I think somebody in here should know it. Teacher says, every time a bell rings, and that's what we're talking about today. Good job. Today we're going to cover angelology. So I'm going to start off with a video. We're going to watch it real quick, and then I want to get some of your thoughts on it. Well, I was going to show you guys a video of the cherubim, the seraphim, and the openim, but this does not seem to want to work. So we are going to go directly to the slides. So when we think of angels, or when you guys think of angels, what do you typically comes to your mind? What kind of images do you see? What characteristics do you kind of associate with them? Anybody?
The wings and the halo.
Oh, like the ring. I don't particularly have an image, but my Bible tells me that angels watch over us all the time. So I believe that. I believe they guard us against danger a lot of times.
Yeah. So here's some of the common images people might get. Here's some classical Roman renderings of angels. There's the halo you were talking about. So what makes an angel an angel? So bodies are not directly attributed to angels. Some people hold they have bodies made of refined matter or material different from humans. Others say a spiritual body. So if we go to 1 Corinthians 15:44, it says, "It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body." So masculine pronouns are often used to define them, and they are sometimes even described as men. So if you go to Mark 16, 5 through 6. Mark 16, 5 through 6. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. And he said to them, "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him." When they appear, they generally take the form of a man, and their lifespan is typically not subject to death the same way you would think of with humanity. And that makes sense. Mostly when angels are mentioned, especially if you get into the book of Daniel, they are residing beside God. So if you're already residing beside God, you don't need a physical death. You're already spiritually there, right? They are normally invisible, but can appear according to the will of God. They've appeared to Joseph in a dream, as in Matthew 1:20, to Isaiah in a vision, in Isaiah 6:1 through 8, and to Elijah and his servant in 2 Kings 6:17. They cause mental and emotional agitation to Mary, in Luke 1:29-34, and they cause mental and physical weakness to the Roman guards who saw the stone from Christ's tomb being rolled away, Matthew 28:4. Wings. So the seraphim are described as having 6 wings. The cherubim had 4 wings. And when you think of the cherubim and the cherubim and the way that they're sort of described, some of the images of them, and we would have seen that in that first video, they kind of come across as terrifying. And when you look at the Bible, often when angels come, well, the first thing they say is, "Do not be afraid," right? And I think typically we like to think of them as just kind of like human beings who, are a bit more beautiful, maybe with the halo effect, maybe with wings, but sometimes in their natural state, they can be terrifying. And maybe that's partially because of, what their duty is as to be a messenger, or to also, do some of the work of God, or sometimes even destroy cities when God sends them. Their appearance can be different from a human physical appearance. So Gabriel was caused to fly swiftly to Daniel, and the Apostle John saw the angel of judgment fly in the midst of heaven. Remember, people are always people and angels are always angels. That was a common misconception that I heard growing up, is that when people die, you become an angel. We hear all the time, oh, you're such an angel. And people often take these things and they associate that an angel is just someone who has lived their life and died. Angels are separate spiritual beings. They are a form of Elohim. They are different than human beings. And as far as their classification versus human beings are more so favored by God than angels are, even though angels typically tend to be subservient. Also, when you read certain passages in the Bible, sometimes it seems as if angels have free will, and there's other times where, like the Ophanim, they don't necessarily have free will. They're more so subservient to God, and they are there for his praise, right? Whereas human beings, we know as a categorization, we have free will that God has given us. People never become angels at all. And that was the movie I was referencing earlier, It's a Wonderful Life. Zuzu, Zuzu, my little ginger snap. Do all angels have wings? The Bible does not say so, and we cannot say with certainty. Angels that are described as flying may simply convey their swift, obedient service as well. Michael alone is called the archangel in Jude 9. It is likely that Michael was at one time second in command, not the leader of the angelic hosts. Satan, as a fallen angel, apparently has more power than Michael, apart from the Lord, for Michael did not dare bring against him a railing judgment. Jude 9. Cherubim and seraphim. These two are both associated with the glory of God. The cherubim guarded the most holy places, like when Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. The entrance to the garden was guarded by the cherubim, so they couldn't get back in. And it was guarded by the most holy place from those who had no right access to God, and assured the right of the high priest to enter the holy place. And that is an image of the Ark of the Covenant. Who is the angel of the Lord? The angel of Yahweh appears to be some sort of manifestation of Yahweh. This could be understood in terms of theophany, a revelation of God. The angel of Yahweh may also be the pre-existent Son of God who was later incarnate in Jesus Christ. And that's a very common theory that I've heard, right? The angel of the Lord is sort of this, it's another, it's Christ before Christ becomes Christ in spirit. And kind of, it's a way of showing and basically predicting and foreshadowing what is to come when Jesus comes to earth. So taking another and analyzing another part of Genesis of angels, going back to Genesis 6. The view takes seriously the use of the term sons of God in the ancient Near East and elsewhere in the biblical text as referring to angelic beings. This view explains why God's judgment was on humanity with the accompanying declaration that mankind was but flesh. It explains how angels who do not marry could take wives for themselves via possession of wicked, powerful men. And some of this... there are apocryphal works that go into this more heavily, but remember those apocryphal works are not canon. When you read apocryphal works, it's important not to take them literally, but to look at them as maybe a reflection of how people of that time were interpreting the Bible and how they kind of saw certain things and saw, how angels would be in their viewpoint, or maybe how God was in their viewpoint. So it's more important from an archaeological standpoint than a theological standpoint. However, that will help you understand some of their practices that they had back in the day and their viewpoints back in the day when it came to the Bible. The ministry of angels, right? So these are some of the purposes and the ways that angels have been used throughout the Bible. So revealing, you have that in Luke 1, 11 through 20. Guiding, Matthew 1, 20 through 21. Providing, 1 Kings 19, 5 through 7. Protection, Daniel 3 and 6. Delivering, strengthening, encouraging, agents in answering prayers, and attendance upon the righteous dead. Angels minister to God's children. Their primary job is to deliver messages, right? To be kind of, in a sense, a go-between between God and humanity as far as, okay, I need the humans to understand this, or I need to warn them of this. So I'm going to send an angel in order for them to understand or to get this message or to be warned. And once again, sometimes that message can be through verbal means. It can also be through destruction, like what you saw in Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, you are committing great sins. You are falling away. So as a result of that, you have to be destroyed. And then later on, that being destroyed as an example, it shows you the price and the cost of sin and the wages of sin being death and what happens when a society fully goes into sin, right? So when we talk about angels being messengers, it's not always, like a Pony Express type deal where they're going down, handing a letter, or talking to somebody directly and letting them know. Sometimes it is through action as well. So we should not expect special revelation through angelic messengers, and that is very important, okay? Especially, in the latter 50 year, in the former 50 years, we've seen a lot of cults, like the Heaven's Gate, the Branch Davidians, and other cults, who their leaders will say, an angel gave me a special message, and I have special revelation, and this is what this means, and I'm supposed to lead you, and I'm supposed to go forward, right? That is just a very clear sign that they are a false prophet and that you should not follow them. In fact, we should be suspicious of any claims of such revelation in light of the teaching in 2 Corinthians 11:14. So if we go to that real quick. Corinthians. No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Which is very important, especially if you look at the context of other religions. Like I know within the LDS faith, which claims to be a form of Christianity, but their belief systems are far from Christianity, and as far as salvation, as far as man's role and what man can become. Even when talking about God, they believe that anyone can be God if they're exalted, and that Jesus Christ isn't the one true God, right? The way that all started was Joseph Smith was surrounded by a cloud of darkness, and then an angel talked to him. Same thing with the Prophet Muhammad, right? You see a lot of these religions that will use Christianity or Judaism as a springboard. They will have this language of an angel came to them, and maybe something did come to them, but it wasn't an angel of light. It would be something of darkness, right? And usually that kind of trope, that an angel comes to them and is giving them some type of divine revelation that is slightly altered or completely altered from what God gave to his people, you find that a lot, and that's something to be suspicious. And it's also kind of an apologetics point that you can bring up if you're talking to somebody who's, say, LDS or is Islamic, is that is a common theme you'll see, and it's kind of an inversion, of Christianity. And also, Matthew 24:11, in the last days, many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And we've seen that. We've seen that, like I said, with, for instance, the People's Temple or Heaven's Gate, or even in mainstream prosperity gospel, where, there's this understanding or teaching that the more you give monetarily, the more you'll be blessed by God. Or, God only talks to the rich and doesn't talk to the poor. And the richer I become, it only means that I'm more blessed. There's going to be more false prophets, and as we go on in time and get closer to the end of time, churches that speak these messages are going to be more and more prevalent, right? And it's our job as Christians to be able to discern from these pastors who are false or from teachers who are false, and be able to go forward and apply doctrinal principles and apply the Bible and understand what is righteous and what is not. Now, it's possible for God to speak to us today through an angel. Is at the same time highly improbable given the fact that he has spoken to us in these last days by his Son. And let's say one day you feel like you have been talked to by an angel. Is what the angel's saying in line with the Bible? that is the primary source in which you need to judge it against, right? If you feel like you're getting a message, right? And there's many people who do feel like they're getting a message, and maybe they're getting a message for something wicked, maybe they have schizophrenia or some high-level bipolar disorder. What they have to do is judge what is being said against the Bible, right? There's not going to be an angel that's going to tell you to go and hit your neighbor in the face, okay? There's not going to be an angel that is going to say that you need to take an AR-15 and try to go overthrow the government by yourself, right? Judge whatever messages you feel like you may be receiving from angels or from God directly against the Bible. And remember, no angel would ever demand that you worship it. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. So from that, we can infer that while prophecy can still happen today, it will most likely happen less and less as we've gotten the final example through Jesus Christ as to what we need to be, right? Jesus Christ was inferred to and foreshadowed throughout the Old Testament. He came about in the New Testament, and the Bible takes us from the beginning of time all the way to the end of time. So with that being an understanding, there's very little extra that we really need to garner from, because we have pretty much everything we need in those 66 books. Not saying it can't happen, but saying it would happen less frequently if it did happen. Angels do not know what it is like to be born again. It can be inferred that angels don't know what it's like to be born again. When you're reading the Bible, most of them live in the presence of God. They know God personally, day to day, right? So there isn't this need necessarily to be born again or to be resaved. And I think that's also why, like with Satan, right, when these angels go against God, because they get to have a more intimate knowledge and personal knowledge and live with God, right, it's less forgivable. Like each and every one of us, or say you meet somebody on the street who has no presence, who doesn't know who Jesus Christ is, well, if they don't know him and they've never personally met him, it's a bit harder for some people to believe. But if you're in the presence of God every day and you know what he's capable of, you know his powers, and you still choose to defy him, that is very willful, and I guess it would beckon the call of, is there still redemption in that? And that's an answer that, right, I don't know personally. I don't know personally if there's any type of redemption for angels. It doesn't really touch on that in the Bible. But overall, you could infer that it wouldn't be needed. All right. Oh. And that is it. That was just a quick entry-level look into angelology. Some other things that are interesting to note. So really when you talk about the cherubim, the seraphim, and the OFWB, they were classified completely as angels through the Catholic Church in the 1200s. Before that, there were Jewish sects, especially before Christianity, and some Christian sects, who would go back and forth and say, okay, are these angels, are they separate beings? They're Elohim, they're spiritual beings, but do we fully believe they're angels, or are there something different? Because, especially when you get into the book of Daniel and with the OFWB, it's a very weird vision, right? And they're acting in a way that may not typically be associated with angels. So there was a lot of pushback on that, but then the Catholic Church kind of came through and they came up with a hierarchy, I forget what it's called, because I think there's like 19 classifications with it within the Catholic Church. And as Protestants, we didn't really follow that as much. But they classify and they give levels even within the OFWB, cherubim, serabim. And I think they put OFWB at the top because they kind of hold up God's throne or his chariot. But yeah. So I hope I didn't go too fast, and I hope that wasn't too overwhelming. Jonathan contacted me and he said you could talk about anything you wanted to, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. So are there any thoughts about angelology, like some of the stuff you guys heard today, or any questions? Anything of that nature?
You said something about that angels wouldn't need redemption because they live with God. And I thought about the fact of original sin. They wouldn't be under the curse of original sin since they're not human, right?
Correct. Now, does that mean they can't defy God? They can defy God. Now, there's certain classifications, like the angels who are around God's, throne room, and all they say is, "Holy, holy is the Lord all day." It's not expressly stated that they don't have free will. Maybe they're doing that because they know the glory of God. But if they're doing that all day, most likely they're not thinking about anything besides that. So they may not go ahead and defy. So, and this is all inference for me, by the way. So, not gospel truth. But is less, I think it would be less likely for them to go ahead and try to defy God versus like, the seraphim or the cherubim or like Satan, right? Who would go and, have the time and think, well, I'm the most beautiful, I'm gracious, I'm powerful. And even when you talk about like, angels versus humans, one of the reasons why God loves humans is their weakness. Even with the tribe of Israel, right? He chose them because they were the weakest tribe, and he could use their rise to quote unquote glorify his power. And also, being weak beings, it takes a lot more faith to go ahead and try and believe in God, especially with all the horrible things we see, and because we're subject to death. So if you're a being that's kind of immortal and you're not subject to death and you are very powerful, in some ways, if you're in the presence of God, it's harder to, defy God because you understand more intimately, seeing day to day. But at the same time, if you're a super powerful being, you could also, on the flip side, go, well, I'm powerful, maybe I could overthrow him, like Satan did, right? Like we know about Satan, we don't know the individual stories about any of the other angels that were fallen and what their motives were, or why they tried to overthrow. But yeah, I would just assume, and maybe Scott, your thoughts on this too, they would, if you're with God every day and you have these supreme powers and you get to be in his intimate quarters, I feel like if you do betray him with that understanding, it's a lot heavier than human beings who don't necessarily see God. God's around us, but we don't see him physically face to face every day.
I don't feel like they'd stay there if they betrayed you.
Yeah.
Say that again?
I don't think that God would allow them to stay there if they betrayed him. Mm-hmm. They'd be kicked out.
Yeah. And I mean, even when you look at the apocryphal works, and once again, apocryphal works being like how, not as canon, right, but as how the people of the time would have perceived what they were reading and their understanding of things. Whenever angels are mentioned, whenever there is the angels go against God or betray God, specifically when they betray God in order to hurt humans, God is very harsh. Like when you talk about the Watchers, and when the Rephaim come down and then they make children with the women, God's like, hey, those children were never supposed to exist. I told you not to do that. They're cursed. And you're cursed for doing this. But he doesn't curse all of humanity as a result. Which, once again, that's just to show you kind of how the people perceived it at the time and how they saw, okay, this is the relationship between God, humans, and angels based on what we've read. So, yeah.
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Are demons fallen angels?
There's two schools of thought on that. There's that school of thought that they're fallen angels. There is another school of thought that says they are the spirits of the Nephilim and the Rephaim who betrayed God, and when they died, especially if they died in the flood, they are kind of those spirits trying to manifest and come back and get bodies and mess with human beings because they were cursed from their inception. Now that second one is more kind of supported by older works and apocryphal works. So it's not necessarily gospel truth, but that was a very prominent thought in older times. That is not so much thought. Today, the more prevalent thought and the more academic thought, I would say, is that they are fallen angels who did try to betray God. But I mean, at the base level, what they are higher spiritual beings who had intimate knowledge of God, who betrayed God, and as a result, they were cursed to an eternity of suffering. So.
You started out talking about a movie, and I don't know the name of this movie because I forget things. There was a movie that contained a character, it was Denzel Washington was in it, he was a police officer, and there was a demon, Azazel, and I think that name is in some of the apocryphal works.
It is.
But that was a creepy movie. You started out saying something about that way of thinking is creepy about angels.
Yeah, and so and some of the apocryphal works, like there are other angels that are named, there are other demons that are named, like Asmodeus, Azazel, and even in like certain sects of Judaism, and it's more so Kabbalah, which is a little bit more out there. There are demons. There are angels associated with certain things and demons associated with certain things. Like, for instance, there's a demon associated with lust that essentially lurks around you. It's not even just like a traditional like succubi or incubi, because incubi is like a male sex demon that would try to attract you to sin, and then the succubi is a female sex demon that tries to attract men to sin. But there's like other demons that, for instance, they wait around while you're doing that, and they're trying to essentially suck your life force out of you while you're doing that. But no, in certain, specifically in Kabbalistic Judaism, there is an angel and a demon associated with, the angels are associated with everything positive, and then demons associated with everything negative. But yeah. And I think it's the book of Tobit that goes into more angels of the apocryphal works. And I believe, I could be wrong, I think that's one of the apocryphal books that the Catholic Church may allow, but I don't want to say that with certainty because I don't know off the top of my head. But there are certain apocryphal works that the Protestant Church doesn't necessarily look at, but the Catholic Church will look at and examine. But yeah, no. And yeah, one thing I will not do demonology, because that's a whole nother, I'm not going to get into all that wickedness. But yes, one of the most important things, I guess, to know, even from all this lessons, right, is that it is not just God and then human beings, right? And then going back to, the message of Ephesians 6:12, our greatest enemies, too, and we're talking about demons, right? Our greatest enemies are not human beings. Your brother to your left and your right, they may annoy you, they may agitate you, they may commit horrible acts, but they're not your greatest enemy. Our greatest enemies are these evil forces that we cannot see day to day. They want to influence us to throw our eternal souls away to accomplish, their evil, twisted deeds, right? So as you go throughout your day to day, right, use that as a way to propel you to be more forgiving and to understand, there's wickedness in this earth. There's also these spiritual beings that are trying to influence others to do wickedness. And especially when people are lost and don't have God, right? It's like, imagine the Holy Spirit inside of you being extinguished and going lower and lower and lower as you, get farther and farther away from God. These entities will creep in more and they'll try to influence you more, which they can't take away your free will, right? But they can, affect you in a way that, may kind of encourage you towards doing negative, right? Like when I think of demon possession, I don't think of The Exorcist. I think of like maybe a woman who grew up very innocent, fell on hard times, and then, maybe went to drugs, and then the drugs led to prostitution and maybe robbery or other evil things, right? when you're spiritually weak, I mean, spiritual warfare is real. And when you are spiritually weakened, they are evil entities that will try to take advantage of that and try to bring you down, right? That's why it's important to stay in the Word and maintain a relationship with God. So, enough of my rambling. Any other questions?
Well, just to follow up on what you were just saying there, it's important for us to remember being spiritually strengthened is not a matter of learning all of these classifications and arguing over what kind of angels and who's at where in the hierarchy. A lot of that, like you said, is just supposition. It's people trying to figure things out. But we're given the Word. We're given the Scripture to go by. And it's not on us to understand everything. The more we grow, the more we will understand. But there's a lot going on with angels that we're just not told. And that's because it's not on us to define it. By being spiritually strengthened, we have to be spiritually strengthened, we have to focus on our relationship with God. Being filled with the Holy Spirit gives us an ally, a person, a part of God dwelling in us that knows all of this, knows all these things that we don't know, and is strong enough to handle all of these things that we don't understand. We need to know it's real, we need to know it's out there, but it's not a question of us learning all of the names. You know, there's no power given through the knowledge. The power is given through the relationship with God, and that's what we're supposed to focus on.
Absolutely. Like, there are so many theological rabbit holes. If you went through every historical theory or doctrine, I mean, you wouldn't be able to do it in your lifetime. It's neat stuff to know. It's neat stuff to learn, especially because it's like, at least for me, right? Reading this stuff and all these interesting stuff, it's better than going and seeing a fantasy movie that may have, demonic undertones or something, and I don't even know it. To me, it's like, it's entertaining, and it's also neat to know some of these ins and outs. But like Scott said, there's so much we're just never going to know because we're not permitted. And I mean, angels, we don't pray directly towards them, and they're only going to do things for us or to us underneath the discretion of God. Okay? And except for the fallen ones, and even the fallen ones, right, they have their limits, right? I'm sure if Satan could, he would, try to destroy all of humanity and take us all to hell. Unfortunately, he's not allowed to do that, and he knows he's not. So, all evil has limits. And I'd say the more you focus on God, the Word, and try to emulate a life of Christ and serve Jesus, the more protected you are from evil all around you. Although evil will still try to come and try to tempt you, right? Also, the more you stay on your path, and the more closer to God you try to be. There's always going to be these temptations, right? But there's a difference between long suffering, right, which I think sometimes God can use to glorify His Word, and so that we can understand Him, and that also so that we can be tested in this world. And then short-term suffering, which I think is more so an agent of the devil to try to get you to trip up. I don't think it's necessarily coincidental if somebody has been sober for 10 years and then they had a hard day at work, and then all of a sudden they magically, on accident, they turn a corner they've never been on the street, and there's a bar right there, right? I'm not a person who believes in coincidences, and I think we're tested a lot in this world, but I don't think there's anything we can't overcome with Christ, right? Which there's a saying, we can do anything through Christ, it's God doesn't put more on us than we can't handle, And I think people take that to mean there's a limit to what will be put on, that will be put on us by God. And I think what it actually means is with God, anything that's put on you, you can handle, right? So that doesn't necessarily limit what's going to happen to you in this world. But when you have somebody who loves you, is going to protect you eternally, you know, even if you're in the midst of a horrible situation, you know, you're dying. I mean, for instance, the amount of stories of missionaries I've heard who they got captured by some tribe or some group and they were being tortured. And even when they were being tortured, they reached out to God in their last moments. They knew that even though it wasn't going to end up well for them, for eternity, they'd be with their Father, and that'd be a beautiful thing to look forward to.
Well, that goes all the way back to Stephen. Mm-hmm. You know, we're given that story in the Bible where he is killed by the unbelieving Jews, but he sees Christ standing at the right hand of the Father's throne and specifically asks for these people who are killing him to be forgiven, because he doesn't want that to get in the way of them eventually being saved.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of faith. I would say most people, if they were in the line of being killed or being tortured, that'd be a very hard thing to do. I mean, some of us, hey, listen, a guy cuts me off in traffic. My first reaction initially is not to pray for him, I'll tell you that. But I will say this, as I've gone through my spiritual journey versus before when I didn't know God, there's a lot more peace and calmness in my life that I thought I'd never have. So, yeah. Any more questions? Okay. Well, then this concludes entry-level angelology. I hope you guys got something out of this, and if not, I apologize. Right. And before we leave, I'd like to pray us out. Father God, thank you for allowing us to have this time together of fellowship. Thank you for allowing this lesson on angelology to be good and to inspire it. Please let everybody in this room use this knowledge to propel your word forward and in an apologetic sense in order to help convince people to, you know, explore the faith and eventually come to the faith that you're urging. Thank you for once again giving us the light of this world, and despite all of the suffering, always loving us and shining your light and sending your angelic messengers down when you needed to deliver a message to us or protect us or discipline us when we as human beings are being unrighteous, as we often are. Thank you for giving us your Son, and thank you for promising us that he will eventually return to correct all the wrongs of this world and to take us home to your beautiful kingdom. Amen.